Guys, welcome to the first episode of 2023. Hey, I'm Matt, and I'm also known as Coach. I'm glad that you're here. If you haven't found my channel before, maybe after the end of this episode, hopefully you'll stick all the way through it because you're going to learn a lot. Maybe you'll consider hitting a like and give me a subscribe. I really appreciate it. Channel's growing really well, and 2023 is going to be our year and yours as well. Hey, this week we're talking about landscape drainage, how to protect your home and then the investment that you make a payment on every single month. The number one cause of residential damage is usually attributed to water, whether it has come in from the outside or whether it started on the inside. But we're going to be taking care of the outside for you today, so let's get started. Managing the water that comes off of your dwelling, that lands in your yard, or even on the kind of the worst case scenario, when it runs into your yard because of the way you're situated, is the number one cause of things going wrong with your home and your property values. So when you have a huge rain event, when you have a big snow melt, when you have that cloudburst thunderstorm thing, dumps a bunch of rain on you within an hour, this can really end up being a costly repair, especially if it's over a period of time. You know, when you start talking about dry rot funguses, black mold, mud sill deterioration, wicking up into the interior walls, these are some of the most costly repairs that can go on in a residence. I would kind of hazard a guess that most of the construction industry and the repair industry and the handyman industry would probably agree with me when I say that water is the number one cause of residential damage. And we're going to be dealing with that water that originates outside, and we're going to do our darndest to make sure it does not get on the inside where it can start really taking apart your home piece by piece. Let's take a look at the primary, literally where it begins as far as water management on your property. And it doesn't start at the ground, it starts up in the air. And that is generally a gutter system. Now, I've done a lot of traveling and I've seen a lot of homes all over this North American continent. And I'm sure it's in many of the other continents as well where you don't have a gutter system. And a gutter system for the people who have heavy snow loads and that kind of stuff, okay, I kind of get it. But there are ways that you can manage that as well with electrical tapes and that kind of stuff on the eaves. But for the rest of us, water management starts up there. And a good, well-installed gutter system, and one that is maintained and kept in good order year after year, is going to last you decades when it comes to service for you. Taking that water off of that roof, putting it through the downspout and down to ground level is one of the greatest ways to mitigate any sort of problems. However, a gutter system up there can also backlash on you if you don't take care of it. And it gets clogged and it starts overflowing onto the fascia boards and down the wall, etc. That's where you get stucco damage, that's where you get eaves damage, and that's where you get dry rot that can eventually permeate into the inside of the house. Not a good deal. So if you put a gutter system on there, make sure you take care of it. You clean it out in the fall, you clean it out at least once after the fall and in the spring. Not that big a deal considering what it's going to be doing for you. All right, moving down, let's go to ground level. And this is where my expertise really shines now. Here's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about an underground drainage system that is going to take that water from your dwelling. It's going to take that water that is out in your yard and the water that might be intruding into your yard from your neighbors or the landscape itself, the topography of where you live. And you're going to capture it. You're going to capture it and direct it where you want it to go. Not where it wants to go, where you want it to go. If this is something new to you and something that you have not dealt with, maybe as a first-time homeowner or whatever, you might want to consider checking out youryardcoach.com and checking out the ebook or the digital course there, where I go quite deep into the topic of installation of drainage systems. They can really help you get off on the right track and stay on the right track. My very first house, and I share a story in the book and the course, was a crash course in drainage. I learned very early on by the installation of a particular type of drainage system that I needed to install right quick because it was now threatening the back foundation wall of my home and flooding my garage. That story is kind of interesting. Moving on, we can talk about the next most important component of good drainage, and that is if you have a new landscape or one that you're going to make over, or even one that you have and you need to correct, and that is getting the proper grading and slope established. If you do nothing else, if you don't put a gutter system in, if you don't put a drainage system in, if you have the proper grade and slope, chances are you will be okay. You will not be optimal, but you'll be okay. And that water can move away from the dwelling and out into the yard or wherever it needs to go. But where out in the yard? What is it going to do when it leaves that dwelling? It's still a job for a good installed drainage system. If you can establish a 1% grade, preferably 2% grade, going away from your dwelling. And now remember, you're going to be putting in patios and walkways and other things that are going to be literal dams for water to move away. So I'm talking about the type of home that is not going to have any of those things. So you might want to consider coming off the gutter system, coming off the eaves or whatever, some type of a capture system, and I'll cover that here in just a few minutes. Most people are familiar, if you're a homeowner, most people are familiar with the style of plumbing that goes into landscape drainage systems. You either have 3, 4, or 6 inch, 6 inches more for commercial, but 3 and 4 inch type of corrugated flexible drain line or your PVC drainage lines. Either one works well. The corrugated is easier to work with when it comes to moving around curves or obstacles. The PVC is kind of rigid. It's basically 90-degree type of stuff with a few 45s here and there. So you choose which one is going to be best for you. Once we get our trenches established, and we're going to make the trench a sloped type of trench. You cannot go into a drainage system with no slope. Water needs slope and grade in order to evacuate. So we're going to have our most shallow part of the trench at the origin of our drainage system, and then the deepest part of the trench at the termination point. Hypothetically, we're starting in the backyard and we're moving to the front yard. That makes the most sense, don't you think? So we're going to put our trench in a minimum of, say, 4, 5, 6 inches at the origin, and hopefully get something like 10, 12, 13 inches out at the termination point. We want to try to establish a slope in our piping and plumbing system that gives you at least 1/8 of an inch per foot. A 1/4 or a 1/2 inch would be fantastic, but we don't all have that. So 1/8 of an inch minimum, 1/4 inch would be optimal. And then protract that over the length of your plumbing run. Make sure your trenches are cleaned out. Do not put plumbing down in there on soft dirt. As you backfill and fill in that area, it is going to settle, and you'll end up with piping systems that are like this inside your trench. You want to have a nice level trenching surface for final installation. Your parts and pieces are pretty obvious. You have gutter adapters, you have the piping I've already talked about, you have T's, you have 45s, and you have termination pop-up valves or boxes that you can connect to. You have catch basins that you can put out in the yard, and you know better than anybody, after being there day in and day out, month in and month out, where the problem areas of your yard exist, if they do exist. You also know what kind of slope and grade you have and what you're going to have to do to establish that. Some people actually have a negative grade. Their backyard is lower than their front yard. And to be a good neighbor, you're not going to be discharging your water onto your neighbor's property. You open yourself up for some litigatory type of situations if you start doing that. So we need to get water, out and off the property. And I'm going to cover a way that you can do that in just a minute, especially if you have a negative grade. One thing I want to hit on about trenching, and that is you have a couple of options, and one way to really make sure that things work best year after year is, if you can, I would prefer you install 45-degree couplings rather than T couplings into your main evacuation line. And why is that? Well, the reason being, if you have your main line flowing in a certain direction and you have another line that comes in and tees into it, in an event, say like a big rain event where there is water coming off your eaves and coming off of your gutter system really, really hard, that tee is going to kill momentum of that water that wants to go out. You have this collision. If you do a 45-degree coupling, then you have water that's coming in like this, and it will actually increase the flow and the rapidness of the water evacuating down the main line. So instead of trenching directly at a 90-degree angle, think about coming off the next downspout or something at a 45 and meeting your main trench at a 45. You'll be more happy with it. Another thing is in a form of installation and maintenance all at the same time, you might want to consider putting in a T, or better yet, a 45 in your main line so that that 45 is sticking up just above ground level, maybe slightly more depending on where you're putting your trench. That way, maintenance, you can stick a hose down in there during the summertime or before the rains come every year, and you can shove that hose all the way down in there and keep that system nice and cleaned out. You don't want it backing up with things like rodents. You don't want it backing up with ant nests, leaves, dirt, debris, roof sand, and other things that come off the roof. So that's an easy way, and a pro tip on how to maintain is you give yourself a clean out port right there. Okay, your termination point. Your termination point is going to be a place where you're going to be able to get the water off of your property. Now, there's a couple things you want to consider. Some counties and cities across this nation and world of ours don't want you discharging water out onto the streets. They want something kind of a green drain type of situation. So you can have your discharge port maybe 6 feet, 10 feet back from your public sidewalk and discharge it there. Maybe do a little dry creek decorative type thing with your evacuation port at the top of your dry creek. And when it does rain and the system starts discharging water, it can gently work its way down through a green drain system and eventually find its way either back into the landscape where you get free water, or it makes its way off the property naturally. Not too many people can complain about that. Okay, moving on. What if you're in a situation where you have water that is coming onto your property from either neighbors or from natural topography? Like what's behind the camera right now is kind of a sloped area towards me, and you can see the lake in the background. Hopefully that doesn't look like your backyard after major rain events. But if we needed to capture water and direct it from this hillside that's approaching me right now, we use a French drain system. And basically that's a trench with a corrugated or PVC perforated type of pipe that has a geotextile or a sediment sock wrapped around it to prevent it getting clogged, and then putting it perpendicular to the area that you need to control that water runoff. And you're going to capture it and redirect it maybe to parts of your main solid pipe draining system, and then eventually off the property. It can allow for water to still come in because you're not going to stop it, but now we're going to control it and we're going to direct it to where it needs to go. So what if we have a negative drainage system, a negative slope and grade, where your backyard floods out every winter or every spring or after a big summer thunderstorm? What do you do with it? You stand on your upper deck there, you look down at your now pondish kind of backyard. What are we going to do with that? Well, we can still capture through catch basins and underground plumbing, and we can direct it to places such as a sump basin. A sump basin can be a main collection point, and then installing a good, reliable mechanical sump pump, we can take that water and elevate it up and out and over to where it needs to go. Mechanically pumping it, we put in a couple of check valves in the plumbing system so water gets pumped but it doesn't come back, and you can evacuate it that way. A sump basin is something that I go in a great deal in the book and the course, and it's also something I have a lot of personal and professional experience. Weed Patch Ranch that Maestro and I used to live at, we had 2 big sump basins 2 big pumps because we had a whole neighborhood that kind of migrated water towards us in the wintertime. I had a big French drain system along the back driveway, and it captured the water and directed it to the sump and then pumped it almost 400 feet out towards the public culvert in the street. Worked out very well, and we learned early on there as well that we needed to do that. So managing water on your landscape, on your property, is one of the #1 responsibilities a homeowner really needs to pay attention to. Now, if you bought an existing home and a system was already there, hey, good job. Hopefully it's working correctly. Make sure you maintain it. If you do not have a system, and say you have no gutters at all, you can do a French drain system at your eave drop where water wants to drop. You can put a trench in there, you can put your pipe and your sediment sock and gravel, and you can capture that water and evacuate it out very, very easily. Many times people use drainage systems in a very decorative way. One of the ones that I used to do all the time is the drainage system was part of a dry creek bed decorative system. And as water came off, you didn't even need plumbing in some cases. It came off the downspout and then ran through a dry creek bed because I had that much slope. And then it discharged itself off into the landscape near the street. It looked really good year round. You kept it clean and it really worked well. And when it was running, it looked like a creek. It really, really did. So maintaining the water on your property is a primary responsibility. I hope you really kind of pick up on the seriousness of what I'm trying to put down here, because ignoring it and allowing standing water and ponding can really seriously intrude on your dwelling, including foundation shifting, foundation cracking, and even wicking and getting into the inside of your home and behind your walls where black mold can take over. Make sure you manage that water. Hey guys, that's what I have for you today. Please give me a like and subscribe if you got something from this. Don't forget the website, youryardcoach.com. Great book and digital course there on how to do all your landscaping needs. If you are on the go, may I suggest you check out the podcast, take it with you wherever. We're on most podcast carriers and right here on YouTube if you check out the playlist. Let me know if I can answer any questions. Don't forget to drop me a comment on what you guys have done with your landscape drainage and what problems have you faced, and more importantly, that you have conquered. Catch you next week. Bye for now.